Hello and welcome to an intro video to using SPSS. So this is really for people who can't attend the workshop or are studying online. I'll be doing all of this in the workshops. So just to get used to SPSS, I've got a little bit of a different setup with my recording, which is causing me a couple of headaches because it's different from how I've done it for other videos. I've got a new little character here. He can't walk around, but he does this. So if anything important comes up, I'm going to breathe a little bit of fire and try and help that stick in your memory as being potentially a gotcha. I didn't make him, he's very cute. I downloaded him from the OK Samurai website. So let's get started talking about SPSS. Now, you'll notice here that one of the things that is different is I've got two screens open and I can switch between these. And that's because SPSS will generate two windows when you open it up. It has the data file itself that you're working on, and then it also has an output window. And this is important because they're actually separate files. So if you go up to the save button here and save your data, it will only save what you have done in this data file and also this part as well, but it won't save anything in your output. If you want to save the output file, you have to go to that file and also click save and save that separately. So just letting you know that those two things are different. Now, if we look at the data here, this should, if you're importing an Excel file, it should import pretty much the same as how you have it in Excel. There's a couple of little differences. The first is that you can only have one set of data in a file. These different tabs down the bottom are different views of the same file. You can't have another worksheet. So in Excel you can open up lots of worksheets. In SPSS you can only have one. And if you import an Excel file into SPSS, I'm pretty sure it'll pick the first worksheet, the first tab, as the one that you want, and it will just ignore the rest. So if you want to have multiple worksheets, you're going to have to actually save them as separate SPSS files. Now along the top here, this is another difference with Excel. We have what's called a dedicated header row, and this contains all the variable names. Now the reason that this is important, a little bit of fire, is because if you have multiple header rows in your Excel file, sometimes people have like 2 or 3 or 4 rows at the top just to keep things pretty and organized, which is great, but SPSS doesn't like it and will get very confused and probably make mistakes with the rest of your data. So I suggest that if you're collecting data for the purposes of importing into SPSS, you just have one plain row at the top. And also the numbering starts from 1 on the first row of data. So if you're comparing row numbers between SPSS and Excel, they'll all be out by 1. Now with our variable names, SPSS will give us a few clues as to what we're looking at. We've got this little ruler symbol for scale and continuous variables. We've got the 3 dots for nominal variables, and we've got this little symbol here for ordinal variables. Now, I think if you've just downloaded this data set, it was put in as nominal, so we'll look at how to change that in a second. And that's a clue as to what you're looking at. And there's one more symbol here that you can see. If I scroll across to the end, and this was something that I typed in. So if we had something that was written in letters rather than as numbers, it would be considered nominal, but it would also get a little letter on it to say that it's letters, not numbers. So SPSS deals a little bit differently with letters and numbers, and sometimes we've got to be careful that that gets the right label. So this is where our data will show up. The next tab across is the variable view, and this gives us the information about each of these variables. And this is most likely stuff that you've written somewhere on an extra sheet. So you can see we've got the variable name here. Now this needs to be kept plain. SPSS does not like spaces or special characters in here, so you can see that these are all just fairly simple. I didn't type anything in here, so that was just an automated name. The next column along tells us whether SPSS thinks we have numbers or letters. So numbers are called numeric and letters are called string, which is just a computer terminology thing. If that's wrong, it may mess up your analysis. It might not let you do stuff. So if SPSS won't do what you want it to do, one of the things that you can check is if this is correct. So if, for example, I have imported this and there were a couple of header rows or something else was a bit wrong, and I did actually have numbers in here, but for some reason SPSS thought it was string, it wouldn't let me do anything that required numbers, because it would go, no, you don't have numbers, I can't calculate a mean or something like that. So you'd have to go into here and change it to numeric. The width is just the width of the column, how many characters across. The decimals is the number of decimal places. Sometimes people import data and it comes up with like 15 or more decimal places. Please bring this down to 0, otherwise you're going to get all those decimal places on every graph that you do, which will get really irritating. The label, here you can write something that's a little bit more descriptive, and when you do a graph it will pop this label on rather than the short name. The values are where we can give letters or words to our codes. So for example, in the married column, where we have just ones, I think 2s and 3s, here we can tell it what those 1s, 2s and 3s mean. And so I really advise you to put these labels in straight away so that you don't forget what the numbers mean. Oh, we've got up to 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can put them in there. The next column across lets us say if any of the numbers actually represent missing data. Maybe we'll talk about this if we come across it in a file, but in this particular file they've used codes for 999 and 999 as missing data codes. Oh, there's some 10s and 11s, just some 10s. That's fairly common. I don't know what columns does. Isn't that interesting? I'll have to think about that one. Align, obviously we're not too worried about that. And then the roll I'm also not too worried about, but this one here really is quite important. This is the measure, and this is what type of variable you have. So this is also important. If you're trying to do something which needs, say, a scale variable or continuous variable, and it's listed as being nominal, it's possible that SPSS just won't let you do it, and it can be quite frustrating where you're trying to do something and it's just not working, and often it'll be because this thing here is wrong. So that's the other thing to check. So I think that's all of the major points. Let's just quickly try doing a graph and we'll just see what pops up in the output window. So the main menu items you're going to need in this course will be the Analyze menu, where we do some of our stats, and the Graphs menu. Mostly we'll be using the Chart Builder, and we'll be using one out of the legacy dialogues as well. So if we go to Chart Builder, this is a drag and drop interface. I'll just reset that to start from scratch. So if we wanted to do, say, a very simple bar chart of smoking status, we would choose the graph that we want, drag it into the window, and then we have to work out which of these we need to fill in. Now, one of the confusing things that I see trips people up is that they try to put something in every box, and that's not the way it works. You need to work out what it is that you want to see and put stuff in the appropriate box. So if I wanted a bar chart of smoking status, I could drag that into the x-axis, so I could have a bar for each of those categories, and then it will count them up, and you can see that it's changed that to count over there. And we don't need to worry about filtering. We're not going to be doing anything fancy at the start. This is just a preview window. If this looks completely wrong, don't panic. It's just a guess to give you an illustration of what it might look like. When you actually press OK, then you'll get the real graph. And if you're in version 24 of SPSS, this graph will most likely be super, super ugly, and you're going to have to play with it to make it pretty. So to manipulate the graph, and this will probably be just the last thing I say because we're up to 10 minutes, just double click on the graph and you'll come up with a chart editor, and that's actually not showing on this particular view I've got recording, so I'll make sure I fix that up before we do anything more on graphs. But just know that if you want to change anything in the graph, it's usually just a case of double clicking on what you want to change and looking for the options over to the side.